Hello, and welcome to Sunset Zen and Sleepy Stories. Please relax, listen, and enjoy. A Long Green Way, Story 4, The State Line, Days 6, 7, and 8, through the Georgia mountains into North Carolina. On the sixth day, Thomas woke before the alarm, as he always did, and lay in the tent listening to the morning arrive. This had become, over the week, one of his favorite parts of the day. These minutes before full waking, before the deliberate beginning of things, when the world was assembling itself in the dark outside the tent, and he was lying still and listening to it assemble. He had been a light sleeper most of his adult life, which had once seemed like a nuisance, and which had gradually revealed itself as a gift. The gift of the early dark, of the quiet before others were moving. But the word, of the strange and private experience of being awake while everyone around you slept. There was a quality of attention available in those minutes that the busier parts of the day did not offer. Everything was still enough that the small things could be heard. The creek, always, the first bird, usually tentative, a single phrase repeated. The wind in the upper canopy, which was a different sound from the wind at ground level. Higher and broader, the sound of the air moving through the crowns of many trees at once. He thought about the days behind him. 6 days on the trail. Somewhere around 40 miles, he calculated. They had been averaging 8 to 10 miles a day, which was not fast by any measure, which was deliberate, which was right. He had bought a small journal of his own at the outfitters at Neal's Gap, a thing he had not planned to do, but had found himself doing. Drawn to the rack of notebooks the way he was sometimes drawn to things he did not know he needed until they were in front of him. It was a small thing, 40 pages, a burgundy cover, spiral bound, and he had been writing in it each evening since. Not the field notes of observation that Owen kept, but something more personal, more discursive. Thoughts, impressions, the things that were happening to him on the inside of the trip, which were not always the same as the things that were happening on the outside. He had written about the rain on day 2. He had written about the bridge. He had written about Eli's news and about the feeling of sitting on the log on the far bank of the Toccoa, hearing it and the quality of relief that had moved through him. Wide and warm, like stepping out of a building into afternoon sun. He had written about Blood Mountain and about Owen's silence on the summit, which had moved him more than he had expected, more than he had words for in the journal. He had tried several versions and crossed them all out, and finally wrote simply, Owen had no words. Which meant the words are still in the mountain, or in the air above it, waiting for someone equal to them. Maybe no one will ever be equal to them. Maybe that's the point. He had written, on the night of his trail name, these words, Stillwater. I will try to be what Eli saw when he said it. Now it was day 6, and the creek was making its sound, and the first bird had begun its tentative morning argument. And in a few minutes he would get up and make the coffee, and the day would start, and they would break camp and head north, toward North Carolina, toward the state line that the guidebook placed somewhere in the morning's miles. Not a dramatic crossing, not a ceremony, just a blaze on a tree and perhaps a small sign, and then the trail continuing. As it always continued, as if states were a minor consideration, which to the trail they were. He got up. The morning was clear again, the sky going from black to dark blue, to the specific pale gold that preceded the sun in the east. Each stage distinct and brief, the transitions quick, the way they always were at altitude, where there was more sky visible, and the changes moved across more of it at once. Thomas made the coffee while his son slept, or while Eli slept, because Owen, it turned out, had been lying awake in the tent for some time and emerged within minutes of Thomas, blinking in the pre-dawn with his field journal already in hand, as if he had been writing in the dark. "Were you actually writing in there?" Thomas asked. "I was thinking about what to write," Owen said, which is close. "What were you thinking about?" Owen sat down on the log they had pulled up to the cold fire ring the night before and looked at the journal without opening it. "I was thinking about the state line," he said, "about what it means to cross from one place to another. Whether the mountain knows it's in two states, whether the creek knows." "The creek doesn't know," Thomas said. "No," Owen agreed. "The creek doesn't know." He paused. "But we'll know. We'll be standing there knowing, and the creek will just be going over its rocks, and I find that interesting. The difference between the thing that knows and the thing that doesn't." Thomas handed him coffee. Owen wrapped both hands around it, the way he always did. The first cup, the most important cup, held rather than drunk for the first half minute. "What does it feel like," Thomas asked, "to be leaving Georgia?" Owen considered this with the seriousness he brought to questions that were actually questions, that deserved an actual answer rather than a deflection. "I haven't left yet," he said. "Ask me after." They were on the trail by 7, moving north through a morning that was cool and alive with light, the sun having cleared the eastern ridge, and now moving through the forest in long, grassed, emphatic diagonals that licked the dew on the spider webs strung between the undergrowth, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, each one a small miracle of geometry, beaded with water, that caught the light and held it for a moment before the web dried and the light moved on. Thomas walked slowly through a stretch of them, not wanting to disturb more than he had to, picking his way with a care that Eli, ahead of him, had already demonstrated without comment. This was something the trail had done to all three of them in 6 days, made them more careful about what they disturbed. Not in an anxious way, not the paralysis of someone afraid to step wrong, but in the way of people who had been paying attention long enough to see that there was more worth attending to than they had first supposed. The trail was not empty. It was full, crowded even, with a life that required no acknowledgement from them, and which they were beginning, gradually, to acknowledge anyway. A Tawi call from the scrubby growth at the trail's edge, the emphatic 3-note call that Thomas had learned in the first days, had learned specifically because Owen had told him it was one of the easier bird calls to it. I had learned that the deeper common parts are men's deep death in blood, and not death. "Drink your TA," the mnemonic went, the first note sharp and short, and the last note long and descending. He heard it and named it to himself silently, and felt the small satisfaction of that, the satisfaction of a word that fit a sound. He had been learning, on this trip, to slow down enough to name things. Not with Owen's systematic thoroughness. He did not have Owen's memory for taxonomy, for the Latin binomials, for the specific and distinguishing features that separated one species from a near neighbor, but in a less formal way, the way a person learns a new neighborhood, becoming familiar with its landmarks and inhabitants without necessarily knowing their full histories. The towhee, the wood thrush, that liquid, spiraling song that came from deep in the forest at certain hours, morning and late afternoon. The most beautiful bird call Thomas knew. The pileated woodpecker, which he had heard twice but not yet seen. Its prehistoric call, like something out of a film about a jungle, completely incongruous in these temperate woods, and also completely right. The world he was walking through was full of names, and learning even a few of them felt like being introduced to people at a party who would otherwise have remained strangers. A small but real shift in the quality of one's presence in the room. The trail north from Blood Mountain moves through a section of the Chattahoochee National Forest that is, in its way, some of the most quietly beautiful terrain on the southern AT. Not dramatic, but packet. Not the kind of beauty that announces itself from a summit, but the accumulated beauty of a forest that has been left largely alone for long enough to develop its own deep complexity, its own layered interiority. Old trees, gaps where old trees have fallen and new light has come through, and the understory has rushed in to fill it, creating small explosions of growth, blackberry canes and fire cherry and the tall, pale stalks of pokeweed. All of it temporary, all of it the forest in the process of repairing itself, which is something the forest is always doing, has always been doing, will be doing long after the last hiker has passed through. Thomas walked and thought about repair. He had been thinking over the 6 days about the years after the divorce, not with the grinding regret that had characterized his thinking about them for too long, that had softened, mostly, over the years, worn down to something more like acceptance. A scar rather than a wound, but with a new angle on them that the trail seemed to be offering. He had been thinking about what he had missed. Not in the sense of cataloging his failures, which he had done enough of, and which produced nothing useful, but in the sense of trying to understand what had been happening in his sons' lives during the years when he had been most absent. Not physically absent, he had always been present on his days, always shown up, always tried, but internally absent in the way of men who are managing grief and are not sure how, who are so occupied with the effort of continuing that they do not have much left over for presence. Olin had been 14 during the worst of it. Alia had been 12. They had, both of them, absorbed the disruption with a grace that Thomas had found humbling and had not, at the time, been present enough to fully recognize. He had been too inside his own difficulty to see clearly what they were managing in theirs. He saw it more clearly now. From a distance of 10 years, with 6 days on a trail and a small burgundy journal and the new habit of sitting still enough to think, he saw it more clearly. And what he saw was that they had done most of it themselves. The managing, the adjusting, the continuing. They had done it at 14 and 12 years old, with the particular resilience of young people who have not yet learned that resilience is supposed to be difficult. who simply do what is needed because what is needed is in front of them and they are not yet aware of the option to be otherwise. He wanted to tell them this. He had been wanting to tell them in some form since the first day on the trail. He had not yet found the right form. He thought, maybe there is no right form. Maybe it is enough to be here, walking north, carrying the knowledge of it. He was not sure that was enough. The state line arrived without warning, which was exactly what the guidebook had predicted and which Thomas had somehow not quite believed. He had expected something. Some change in the quality of the light, or the sound of the forest, or the feel of the ground beneath his boots. There was nothing. There was a blaze on a tree, and, tacked below the blaze, a small laminated sign that someone had put there. Not an official sign, a homemade one, printed and laminated and stapled to the bark, that read, on one side, Georgia with an arrow pointing south, and on the other side, North Carolina with an arrow pointing north. Owen was 10 feet ahead of Thomas when he reached it. He stopped. He stood in front of the sign and read both sides, turning to look south, then north, then south again. Then he stepped forward very deliberately until he was straddling the line, his right foot in Georgia, his left foot in North Carolina, and he stood there with his feet apart and his arms slightly out from his sides, cleaning bags and making boots and wasting poetry. Like a man trying to maintain balance on a surface that was not uneven at all. Eli came up beside Thomas, and they both looked at Owen. Owen looked down at his feet. Then he looked up at the trees. Then he looked south, down the long corridor of trail they had walked, into the state they were leaving. His expression was, Thomas searched for the word, complicated, not sad exactly, not quite wistful. Something more specific, something he could not name with confidence from 20 feet away. How does it feel? Thomas asked. Owen thought about this for what seemed like a full minute, standing there with one foot in each state. Then he said, it feels like every time I've ever stood at a threshold, any threshold, anywhere, it always feels like this. Like the thing I'm leaving was real, and the thing I'm going toward is real, and somehow I am required to be in the middle of them for a moment, which is the strangest place of all. A pause. Also, my left foot is slightly lower than my right foot, he said, which is topographically interesting and also uncomfortable. Eli sat down. Not in distress, not in any recognizable reaction to Owen's words, which had been genuinely moving, which had landed in Thomas in a way he could already feel, but in the simple, helpless, physical way that sometimes happens when something strikes you as funny at an angle you weren't expecting, when the laughter arrives before the mind has fully processed the cause of it. He sat down on the trail, his pack going back with him, and laughed, not politely, not briefly, but with the full body abandon that Thomas had not seen from Eli since he was a teenager. The kind of laughter that involves the whole chest and closes the eyes and requires, occasionally, a hand on the ground for balance. Thomas stood and watched his younger son laugh, and felt something unlock in his chest. Owen looked at Eli with the expression of a man who has said something profound and is being received with the wrong register, and who is deciding, slowly, whether to be offended. He considered this for a moment. Then, with great dignity, he said, I stand by both observations, which made Eli laugh harder. Owen stepped off the state line, both feet now in North Carolina, and looked down at his brother on the ground and said, with the compressed satisfaction of someone who has decided to accept the response he has been given, when you're ready. Thomas looked at Owen. He found he was smiling, not the polite smile of someone performing enjoyment, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere he didn't control, from the same place that tears sometimes came from in the dark. He was standing at the border of two states, watching one son laugh on the ground because the other son had said something true and then immediately said something ridiculous. And he was 53 years old, with a bad knee and a burgundy journal and a trail name that meant being still. And he thought, I am exactly where I should be. He took a photograph. He framed it carefully. Eli still on the ground, one hand pressed to the earth, eyes closed, the laughter already subsiding into something quieter. Owen standing above him with his pack and his dignity, looking into the middle distance. The sign between them and the trail stretching south and north. He took 2 photographs, then put the phone away. He stepped across the line. North Carolina, day 6. He wrote the letter that night. They had made camp at a site called Muskrat Creek, a flat, mossy clearing beside a small stream whose name was perfect for it. The stream making the soft, unhurried sound of water that knows where it is going and is in no particular rush to arrive. Dinner was done. Owen was at the creek's edge with his headlamp, looking at something in the water, crouching with the patience he brought to small things. Eli had retreated early to the tent, the email from the consulting firm having apparently required a response that he had sent and then put away firmly, the phone going into the bottom of his pack with the finality of something closed. Thomas sat by the cold fire ring with his burgundy journal, a headlamp, and a short pencil. He had been thinking all afternoon about what he wanted to say to his sons. Not on the trail, not necessarily aloud, not necessarily now. But the thinking had been building since the state line, since Eli's laughter, since the photograph he had taken and looked at twice already on the walk south of camp. The thinking had been building since day 1, since the motel room at 4:45 in the morning, since he had sat on the edge of the bed with his boots in his lap and listened to his sons breathe in the dark. He opened the journal past his existing entries to a fresh page and wrote at the top, a letter. Not sure to whom. Then he sat with the pencil and the page for a while. The stream went over its stones. Somewhere in the dark, Owen made a small sound of satisfaction. Something found, something identified. Thomas began to write. I have been trying for 6 days to find the thing I want to say to you. Not the daily things, not the check-in, not the question about the knee, or the offer of a snack, or the comment on the view, all of which are true and good and necessary. The other thing, the thing underneath the daily things. Here is what I think it is. I am sorry for the years I was present in Mahdi and absent in everything else. You know which years I mean. I am not going to name them or excavate them here, because I have done enough of that privately, and it has produced a diminishing return. And also, because you both, I think, have made a kind of peace with those years that is more generous than what I've made. And I don't want to disturb that peace by dragging the difficulty back into the room. But I want you to know that I know. That I have always known, in some part of myself, that I could not always reach, that you did something remarkable during those years. Both of you, in your different ways. You kept going. You kept being who you were. Owen, you kept naming things, kept building your enormous map of the living world, kept arriving at the breakfast table with a new fact that you needed someone to know. Eli, you kept attending to what was needed, kept looking ahead, kept setting up the tarp before the rain came, You were 14 and 12. You had not learned yet that this kind of steadiness was unusual. You just did it because you were you, because you had always been you, and I had not done enough to earn it. I am not sure what I am asking. I am not sure this is a letter that requires a response, or that should ever be sent at all. Maybe I'm writing it for myself, to say clearly what I have known unclearly for 10 years. What I know clearly, you are remarkable. Not because you are my sons, not because I am partial, although I am partial, and I am your father, and those things are true, but because you are who you are. Owen, with his field journal, and his Latin names, and his silence on the summit of Blood Mountain, which was the most eloquent thing I have seen in years. Ellie, with his year deferred and his Bloom report checked 2 weeks in advance, and his sentence on the mountain that I wrote down and carry in my pocket. It doesn't need us to think it's beautiful. It just is. You are going away, both of you, in different directions and at different distances, but away, which is right, which is what should happen, which is what I raised you for, in the sense that anything I did contributed to the people you have become. You are going away, and I am going to be in the house in Virginia with the woodworking tools in the garage and the stationary bike and the lesson plans for a new year of students. And I am going to miss you in a way I have been practicing for 22 and 24 years. Since the first time each of you was placed in my arms, and I understood for the first time what it meant to have something you could not keep. You cannot keep people, not even the ones who are yours. They move through you and past you and ahead of you. And the best you can do is walk with them for a while, for as long as they'll let you, and pay attention. I am paying attention. I love you. I don't say it enough. I am saying it here in the journal by a creek in North Carolina, where it will not embarrass anyone. I love you both, Dad. He read it over twice, the pencil held loosely in his hand, the headlamp making a small circle of yellow light on the page. The stream continued. The dark outside the light was complete and soft. He did not tear the page out, and he did not fold it into an envelope that did not exist. He did not look for a way to send it, because there was no way to send it, because there was no cell signal at Muskrat Creek, and also because he had written, not sure if this should ever be sent, and meant it, and was not yet sure he had changed his mind. He closed the journal. He sat for a while with it closed in his lap. Owen came back from the creek. He had a small, pleased expression. Something found, something worth the headlamp and the crouching. He sat down across the dead fire ring from his father and said, "Crayfish. 3 of them, under a flat rock, fully grown." They didn't move when I looked at them. He paused. I thought about catching one, but that seemed rude. "I think they'd agree," Thomas said. Owen looked at the journal in Thomas's lap. He didn't ask. Owen was good about not asking about things that were not offered, which was a quality Thomas had noticed in him over the years and appreciated. For a person who talked as much as Owen did, he had a finely calibrated sense of what was being offered and what was being held, and he did not confuse the two. "Good writing session?" Owen asked, which was close enough to a question without being the question. "Productive," Thomas said. Owen nodded. He looked at the sky, which was fully dark now, the stars appearing. "We're in North Carolina," he said. "We are. It looks the same." "It does," Thomas agreed. "The mountains don't know," Owen said. "The mountains are in both states and don't know either one." Thomas thought about this. He thought about being a thing that existed across borders, that was not contained by the lines drawn through it. He thought about his sons, who were his, but not only his, who were themselves in the full and specific way that people are themselves, which is to say, holy, and without reference to the man who had helped bring them into the world and had watched them and sometimes failed them and loved them without adequate expression for 20-some years. "No," he said. "They don't know." He was glad, he thought, that the mountains did not know. It seemed important that there were things which simply were, which continued without awareness of their own continuance. It made the awareness of the people moving through them more precious, not less. The knowing more significant because it was held by something small and brief against the backdrop of something ancient and unknowing. He was the small and brief thing, sitting by a creek in the dark, holding the knowing. It felt like enough. The 7th day was a long one, they had agreed, looking at the map to push through to a campsite that would position them well for the following morning, which meant nearly 14 miles, the longest single day of the trip. Thomas had done the math on the knee and decided it could be done if they moved steadily and stopped when they needed to. And he was honest about what the afternoon's last miles were asking of him. He was honest. He stopped twice in the afternoon at stream crossings, took off his boots, let his feet cool in the water, which was cold enough to make him catch his breath the first time, and which felt, after a moment, like a gift. He sat on the rocks with his feet in the current and watched the water move around them, the cold working its way up through his ankles and into the persistent low ache that had taken up residence in the left knee sometime around mile 10. The second time he stopped, Eli stopped with him. They sat on adjacent rocks, feet in the water, not talking. The stream here was wider than the ones they had been crossing, a real stream, 3 or 4 feet across, quick and clear, over a bed of small, rounded stones, each stone distinct under the water, brown and gray, and occasionally a surprising pale orange, the iron in the rock. "I used to think," Eli said, after a while, "that you were hard to talk to." Thomas looked at him. I don't mean," Eli stopped, reconsidered. "I mean when I was younger, 15, 16, I thought you were hard to talk to about the things that mattered, the big things." He looked at the water. "I thought you were easier with history than with feelings." Thomas sat with this. He put it beside the letter in the journal, beside the years he had been thinking about, beside the accumulating evidence of what his sons had managed quietly and without complaint. "That was true," he said. "I know," Eli said, without accusation. "It's less true now, I hope." Eli looked at him, not assessing, not measuring the claim against the evidence, just looking, with the direct and not unkind attention that was one of Eli's oldest qualities, the look that had always made Thomas feel, even when Owen was a toddler and Eli was an infant, and the feeling made no rational sense, that this child saw him clearly. "It's less true now," Eli confirmed. The trail helps. Does it? You've been, Eli paused, looking for the word, more available, this week than I've seen you in a long time. Thomas thought about the journal. He thought about the letter he had written and not sent. The one that said, "I love you both," by a creek in the dark. He thought about Stillwater, the name his son had given him, the name he was trying to grow into. "I'm trying," Thomas said. "I know," Eli said. "I can tell." They sat with their feet in the cold water. A water strider moved across the calm pool behind the rock Eli was sitting on. 4 long legs spread wide on the surface, dimpling it without breaking through. The insect's entire existence predicated on the surface tension of water, on the capacity of a thing to hold you up if you spread your weight correctly. Thomas watched the water strider and thought about the surface tension of things, about the way certain relationships, certain families, certain arrangements of love and difficulty could hold you if you were careful about how you distributed your weight. He thought, "I should have been more careful earlier." He thought, "I am being more careful now." "I didn't tell you something," Eli said. Thomas waited. "The reason I deferred." He looked at the water. "I mean, the consulting job is real. The firm is good. I'm excited about it." He paused. "But that's not the only reason." "All right," Thomas said. "I deferred because..." He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. "Because Owen is going to Scotland, and I didn't want you to be alone." The stream went over its stones. A bird called somewhere, distant, a single note, and then silence. Thomas looked at his younger son, 22 years old, sitting on a rock in a North Carolina stream, with his boots off and his feet in the cold water, telling him something true. He did not say anything for a moment. He was not sure he could. "Eli," he said finally. "I know it's probably..." Eli started. "No," Thomas said. "Stop." He said it gently. Let me sit with that for a minute." Eli stopped. He looked at the water. Thomas sat with it. He sat with the fact that his 22-year-old son had looked at the next year, Owen in Scotland, Thomas alone in the house in Virginia, and had quietly, without announcement, without asking for recognition, adjusted his own plans to make that year less solitary, had deferred a doctoral program, had taken a job an hour away, had told him at a river crossing in Georgia in the rain, framing it as a personal choice, as knowing what he needed, as trusting his own forecasting, all of which was also true, all of which was real, but underneath it, alongside it, this. The love of it struck him somewhere he was not prepared for. He reached over and put his hand on the back of Eli's neck, briefly, the way he had when Eli was small and needed something that words did not cover. Eli went very still under his hand, the way he always had, not tense, but present, receiving. Then Thomas took his hand back. "Thank you," he said. He said it quietly and without qualification, without the deflection of "you didn't have to," or the complication of "I would have been fine." Just, "Thank you," received. Eli nodded, once, the small, real thing. They put their boots back on and walked the last 4 miles to camp. The 8th day was shorter, 10 miles to a shelter near the North Carolina-Georgia border area. A day of gentle ridgeline walking through what Thomas was beginning to think of as the characteristic beauty of this part of the trail. The long views, the mountain laurel still showing occasional blooms, the deep forest floor with its ferns and its mosses and its small, particular lives. His knee was better. The cold water stops were working, or the rest was, or the body was simply adapting the way Eli had said it would. He felt, on day 8, more than on any previous day, that he belonged here. Not as a visitor, not as someone making a temporary incursion into the natural world, just as a thing that was present in the woods, moving through them, paying attention. He had been writing in the Burgundy Journal each evening, and in the mornings now too, short entries, quick observations, things he didn't want to lose. He wrote about the water strider. He wrote about the sound of Eli's laughter at the state line, the sound of it, how it had felt to hear it, that full, helpless, physical thing that he had not heard from Eli in years. He wrote, "I want to make him laugh like that again. I want to be the kind of father who his sons laugh with, not just for." He wrote, "Eli deferred from me. I don't know how long I'll be thinking about that. A long time, I think." He wrote, "Owen walked around with one foot in each state, and the expression of a man standing at every threshold he has ever stood at. I think he is braver than he knows. Going to Scotland, going that far, entering a life I cannot easily visit or monitor or worry over in any productive way, that requires a bravery he has probably not named in himself because it is native to him. Because he has always been the one who walked in first without looking back." And then he stopped and looked at what he had written and wrote beneath it, "Owen walked in first without looking back." I remember the first day of school. I remember feeling the loss of it. He did not feel it, or he felt it and kept walking. I wonder now which it was. I should ask him. He had not yet asked him. He thought he might before the trip was over. On the evening of day 8, they sat at the shelter, a new one, larger than the previous shelters, with a long front porch made of split logs where you could sit with your back against the shelter wall and your feet out in front of you and look at the clearing and the trees and the last of the light. And Owen read from the field journal, as he had taken to doing. And what he read was the entry from the state line, which he had written while Eli was still laughing on the ground, having apparently managed to write while standing and watching simultaneously, which was Owen. "Stay with you." He read, "Georgia to North Carolina. Day 6, approximately mile 78.4. The sign is homemade. The blaze is white, standard. The trail continues without acknowledgement of its own significance. Dad stepped across the line last." He paused before stepping, half a second, maybe less. Probably not conscious. He looked north first, then south, then stepped. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Owen stopped reading. He looked at Thomas. Thomas looked back at him. "You were watching me," Thomas said. "I'm always watching," Owen said. "I just usually write it down." There was a long, comfortable silence. The light in the clearing was the last light, orange and low. The shadows very long. The trunks of the trees lit on their western faces and dark on the east, the world divided. A thrush sang from somewhere in the darkening trees. The wood thrush, the liquid spiral of it. One of the most beautiful sounds in these woods, in Thomas's opinion, in all the world. and they all three stopped and listened until it was done. When it stopped, no one spoke for a moment. Then Eli said, 3 more days in North Carolina, then Tennessee, then Virginia, Owen said. Then home, Thomas said. The word sat there, not a sad word in this moment. Not a destination that diminished where they were. Just a fact, a place that existed, that would be there when the trail delivered them back to it, that would receive them when they returned. Home. He thought about the house in Virginia. The garage with the woodworking tools, the planer and the router, and the stack of lumber he had bought in March and not yet touched. A project that was waiting for him with the patience of wood. The quiet of it. The way it would feel in mid-June to walk back through the door with trail legs and a burgundy journal and a name that meant being still. He thought he would be able to carry some of this back with him. The habit of the early dark, the listening, the journal, the water strider, and the spotted salamander, and the mountain laurel, and the wood thrush. The state line, and Owen straddling it, and Eli laughing on the ground, the letter in the journal, unsent. He would carry all of it. He would have to decide, eventually, what to do with the letter. He had been thinking about this without quite admitting he was thinking about it, turning it over the way you turn over something in a pocket, not always consciously, just knowing it is there. He had written, not sure if this should ever be sent, and he still meant that, or mostly meant it. He was not sure his sons needed to receive it in order for it to be true. The writing of it had clarified something in him, had moved something that had been stuck, whether or not it moved anything in them. And yet, he looked at Owen, reading again from the field journal, his headlamp on, his voice low and steady in the evening. He looked at Eli, leaning against the shelter wall with his eyes closed and his boots off, his face tilted slightly up as if toward a sun that had already set. His sons, he thought, maybe they don't need the letter. Maybe they need something smaller and harder, the daily version of it, the thing that requires no occasion, no ceremony, no crisis. Maybe they need what Eli had called availability. To have a father who was there in the womb in the full sense, not just the physical sense. He could do that. He was doing it right now. He would do it on day 9 and day 10. And in Virginia in September when he drove to Charlottesville for dinner, and in the video calls with Scotland, which would be awkward and also essential, which would be the thing that they would do because the thing that they had was worth the awkwardness. He would write back, he would answer the emails and the texts promptly, not in the distracted halfway he had sometimes answered them, one eye on the homework he was grading or the book he was reading. He would pick up the phone when Owen called at an inconvenient hour because Scotland was 5 hours ahead and inconvenient hours were what was available. He would drive to Charlottesville. He would be available. This was not a dramatic resolution. It was not the stuff of speeches or of letters written by firelight. It was a small and domestic thing, the decision to show up repeatedly in the ordinary ways. And it was the hardest thing he knew how to try to do, and he was going to try. The wood thrush sang again, briefly, a single phrase, as if confirming something. Then it was quiet and dark, and they went to their sleeping bags, and Thomas lay on his back and listened to the night. End of story 4. The trail continues north and west into the heart of the North Carolina mountains. There are still 11 days ahead of them, and the terrain is about to change. The trail entering the Nantahala National Forest, where the mountains grow wilder and the gaps deeper, and the distances between shelters longer. On day 10, Eli will twist his ankle on a wet route and keep walking for 2 miles before saying anything. And what Thomas feels when he finds out will teach him something about the difference between the fear of losing something and the love of something, which are related but not the same. That is not yet. Tonight it is enough to have crossed the line, to have sat in a stream, to have heard what Eli said and received it without flinching. Tonight it is enough. Next in the series, Story 5, the Nantahala, in which the forest deepens, Eli's ankle becomes a question, and Owen says the thing he has been not saying since Springer Mountain. If these stories bring you peace, come back whenever you need them. New ones arrive gently. No rush, no noise, just light and words and rest.